Hello, hello, and welcome. If you're interested in learning acrylic painting, you're in the right place. I release new tutorials every single weekend. My name is Jessie Robertson, and this is Keep It Colorful. Now, in today's class, we'll work with soft blending to build a sky, drifting clouds, and a base for our field of sunflowers. You'll learn how to use a grid method to draw the figure, then layer from dark to light, just like the old masters did. We'll be painting flowing fabric, hair, and a sun hat, focusing on light, texture, and atmosphere to capture the feeling of summer as it fades into autumn. This tutorial is absolutely free to watch for 7 days. After that, it moves into our Kick Academy vault. If you need longer with this class or can't make the week, you can tip to own it for just a few dollars, which gives you lifetime access, and I'll put a link for anyone that would like to tip to own this class. Now, for Kick Academy subscribers, don't forget this class is now part of your library, along with over 600 other step-by-step acrylic painting tutorials. The Kick Academy is very much like Netflix for painting. You can browse tutorials by theme, style, skill level, and really paint whatever inspires you. And don't forget, when you're finished this piece, go ahead and share it in our Facebook sharing group. I look at every single painting that comes in, and it's a lovely way to connect with others working on these same projects. Now, if you're ready, let's go ahead and let's begin. First and foremost, we're going to go over our supplies. So today I'll be working on a size 11 by 14 inch stretched canvas, but feel free to use any size of substrate that you would like. Now, for paint colors for today, I'm going to go around the palette in a little circle here. We're going to be using some quinacridone magenta, cadmium red medium hue, cadmium yellow medium hue, and I've poured out a few dollops of that because, of course, sunflowers, some prism violet, burnt umber brown, a tiny dollop of phthalo blue, and ultramarine blue. For our green colors today, we'll be using green deep permanent and hooker's green. Along with some paint colors, you're going to need some paint brushes. And for this class, we'll be using some kind of large decorator's brush or something where we can cover a lot of area quickly. A number 12 flat, six bright, six round, a 1/4 inch flat, a little 0 round, a bristly fan brush, a tiny little size 10-0 acrylic fan brush, as well as a little mop brush. If you have some, we'll also play with some sea sponges for adding texture into our clouds. Make sure you have some paper towel or an old rag, as well as a big jar of water for cleaning and drying off our brushes. Because we'll be using the grid method today, I want you to have a ruler handy dandy and some pencils. And for today's class, I recommended 2 pencils. I recommended that you have a darker pencil, like a regular pencil, or even a brown watercolor pencil like this, as well as a white chalk pencil. And that's because we'll be doing a little bit of an outline for our figure on both a light area and a dark area of our canvas. Two more supplies you don't have to have but are really handy. A spray bottle full of water. When you set this on a nice fine mist setting, you can go ahead and spray your paints. Just very lightly mist them every 15 minutes or so, which keeps them nice and fresh and wet on your palette while you're painting. I always paint along with a little travel size blow dryer. This is fantastic when we have a layer of paint on our canvas, don't want to wait for it to dry, and want to get on to the next step a little faster. That's it for supplies, so let's go ahead and start step one. Now I began this painting with what's called a colored ground. So I want you to go ahead and we're going to take some of our Prism Violet and we're going to mix it with 2 parts yellow. So 1 part Prism Violet to 2 parts yellow. And we're going to make this really beautiful, like a burnt sienna color. A little burnt sienna color. Like this. And we're going to take our nice big decorator's brush and we're just going to coat the entire painting. I like using a big brush, and anything like this will do. Wet your brush, go into that paint, and we're going to go all over and coat our canvas. This is a nice, beautiful, translucent color. And this is also an old oil painter's technique. Of course, oil paints were around before acrylics were even invented. And egg tempera was around before oil paints were even invented. So adding a colored grounds can help us see where we have painted and where we haven't. It can also add an element of warmth or coolness to a scene because acrylics, also oils as well, are a little bit translucent. So this color, as the light penetrates through the acrylics down to the layer of the canvas, it will bounce off of any color that you put in your colored ground. And this warm color, this sienna color, is fantastic for landscapes. And I used it today because of the kind of golden hour. Got golden flowers, and this color looks just really lovely peeking through in certain spots. And another reason I like using a colored ground is whenever I'm working with greens and I need a large amount of darker green somewhere. Green, kind of like this color. See how it's really see-through and you can see a lot of streaks in it. Green is notoriously translucent. And to get something this dark would take 3 coats of the green. And when we start with a bit of a colored ground like this, it does the work for us. So there's kind of multiple benefits to starting from a colored ground, and those are just a few. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give this a blast with my blow dryer. And from here, we're going to work our background, just this soft, expressive sky and a dark base coat for our sunflower field. But let's go ahead and let this dry. Now, once your colored ground is nice and dry, we're going to go ahead and mix the colors for our sky. We've got some beautiful blue hues coming up. So grab some white. We'll be using plenty of titanium white to make all the tints of our colors. So squeeze out, for me, 3 dollops of white next to your blues. Nice size, kind of tablespoon size dollops. And rinse off your number 6 bright brush. I want you to go just the tiniest tip into some phthalo blue. Like I'm just tinting my brush with it. And that one little dollop I'm going to put in this whole blob of white. The phthalo blue has a very strong tinting strength, and it doesn't take much to get a lovely kind of medium blue color. You can always add more, but if you add too much, you've got to use a lot of white to try to lighten it again. Okay. A little something like this for beautiful sky blue. It's just phthalo blue and white. And now we'll mix ourselves another blue. Take some of your ultramarine blue, and this time you can grab a bit of a larger scoop and mix it with the white. And we'll be using this ultramarine blue throughout some of the shadow side in our dress. So if you have like a nice giant kind of tablespoon size blob of this, that will be perfect. So you can see this is more of a cooler purpley blue. One of my favorite colors. And here they are side by side. Ultramarine and white, phthalo blue and white. And feel free to label your color mixes underneath with whatever went into the mix so that you can use your color charts as a color mixing reference later on. And keep one blob, the pure white, for some of the clouds. Now, if we take a peek at this composition here, I'm going to block this into thirds. Like this. And then I'm also going to cut it in half, like this. You can see the sky comes down about halfway, and it dips a little bit lower than half for this subtly curved horizon line. Let's grab a nice big brush like our bristly fan, and let's start with some of this ultramarine blue. Find about halfway down your canvas, and we'll start to we'll go a little bit lower than halfway, and we'll give it a subtle curve upwards. And I want you to get a nice juicy amount of paint on there. Get a little bit of your ultramarine blue in there too. And we can wrap some blue around our side edges. Just mixing a little bit more of my phthalo blue here. Now, when you have a nice juicy amount of paint on there, I want you to go ahead and grab your mop brush for me. A nice big soft brush. If you don't have a mop, just grab a big soft brush like this and use the front side like this. We're going to feather everything together here, okay? Just going to soften these colors down. I've got a little bit of my sepia that didn't dry. That's okay. Just kind of makes a nice tealy bit in the sky. And I can always cover that later if I want to. For now, I'm just lightly softening down some of these beautiful blues. Once we have the blue on, we're going to go ahead and give this a little bit of a blast with the blow dryer, and we'll pull in some beautiful white clouds. Once your blue is nice and dry, if you have a sponge, I want you to grab your little sea sponge, and when these come, they're kind of like a whole ball, and you can just get these at the drugstore. At the art store, they call them artist sponges, but they're really just sea sponges. And instead of cutting them, I rip them, so they have these really jagged and textured edges, which is lovely for putting on clouds. I want you to dip into some white, like just tap it in. And it's best to start with less paint. You can even kind of tap a little bit off. And I want some clouds around, they kind of frame her a little bit. So I'm going to start with some clouds up here. And when I have just a little paint on my brush, I get this beautiful texture. I'm going to do another one up here. And as I let my sponge kind of run out of paint. I might even come in with a few of these other colors, and just to create a bit more kind of texture in the sky. I'm using my phthalo blue here. It looks light now because it's wet, but it will dry a little bit darker, and even get in some of your ultramarine if you'd like. Ooh. It's darker than I wanted it to be. So built in this really subtle texture that reminds me of kind of distant clouds. Now I often come in after we pull on the lady, and I'll brighten the clouds up at the top so they don't all have to be done in the first layer. Just kind of get this nice little pattern on here. Let yours be what it wants to be. Don't force it to be just like mine. If you've got a pattern that you think looks cool, but it's different than mine, keep it. The first layers, our job is just to get the paint down. We can tweak anything as we go, no matter what happens in the underpainting. I want you to learn to kind of trust these layers. I'm going to dab a little bit of some lighter blues or a light touch of some whites along the horizon line here. Just along here, that will help us when we get to blending in the ground. Okay, and that's it for now. Let's get this texture on and then let's leave it be. Now, if you want to use your sponges later on, it's always good to keep as much paint as possible out of our cleaning water. So I will squeeze them on a napkin to get out as much paint as I can. And then I rinse them in the sink. And this class is live today. So we're just going to go nice and slow together, step by step. I'm just cleaning off my brushes that I used because we're going to use the same brushes for our grass. So rinse off your bristly fan, your mop brush, and your flat. Push them right down to the bottom of that water cup, side to side. And I like to wring out my mop brush because there's so much water in it. Pat them dry and they're ready to go for this next step. And that next step is going to be building in a dark base coat of greens as the base for our sunflower field. We're going to mix some green colors, but primarily we're going to be mixing a dark green color right now. I want you to take a scoop of your green deep permanent, a nice big dollop of your green deep permanent. Okay. And then grab a little scoop of your quinacridone magenta and mix it together. Also go into a little bit of your cadmium red medium hue. We want this to be looking like a dark green. If it's gone kind of too purple or too brown, just add a little bit more of the green deep permanent until it looks like a really dark, kind of grayish green. And it does have a subtle purpley undertone, but that's nice to have in a shadow area. So here's my color. It's a beautiful dark green. And I'm just gonna add a little water to the edge of this color so you can really see the hue, so you can really see the color. It's kind of like a pine green. How pretty. Okie dokie. Now go ahead and grab your peripherally fan for me. And we're gonna put this dark green right along the bottom. Now, don't rush too far ahead because we're gonna do some different colors as we come up to the blue. So don't just pull all this up. Wait for me. Using a complementary color can be a great way to darken a color. So this is my green deep permanent with some of that red and magenta in it. Dark, piney, it's gonna look so fabulous, like popping her, helps create the contrast for her dress down there. And now I'm gonna go into some plain green deep permanent without the purple in it. Still leave some space before the sky for me, okay? And now I'll go into a little bit of Hooker's green. Still leave some space for me before the sky. It's really subtle transition. That's one of the nice things looking at a painting is even in the shadows, noticing all the subtle shifts of hue. And hue is just another way of saying color. Okay. I've painted a little bit around the side edges as I went. Rinse off that fan brush for me. And we're going to come into some of our sepia color, the background color that we mixed originally for in behinds. And I'm going to grab my bright brush. And if you ran out, just mix, 2 parts yellow or even 3 parts yellow to 1 part prism violet. And let's kind of come across this line here. Actually, I'm going to add a bit more yellow. Adding a bit more yellow to that sienna color gives us something a bit more like this. Here, I took this color and just added a little more yellow. And I've taken a nice big dollop of it. And now I'm going to pull this up near the sky. I want my sides to come up about halfway. So if I were to kind of find half, the sides should come up about halfway. And I might take my brush and I'm going to wipe off all the paint. So I'm starting with just a clean, wet brush, and I'm just going to work the edge. I'm not going to move all over. I'm just going to hover over this edge here, and I'm going to do some little taps. And my edges are wet, but I'm going to try to snuggle in here. So I'm just using a clean, wet brush. I'm going to do some little taps. In fact, I'm going to take a very tiny pinch of white and I'm going to mix it with some of our sunflower color. And I'm going to do some little taps up here too. That little bit of white can be nice. I also wanted to suggest if you add lots of water into your color, it will make it a bit more see-through too. I want to soften this edge quite a bit here. I'm going to apply lots of paint. Then I might take a brush, like my mini fan, and I'm going to keep working this edge. I don't want it to grow too much, so I'm just going to focus on the edge. I'm not going to move it up or down. I'm just going to kind of push some of those colors in there so they look a bit softer. And once it's kind of looking nice and soft up into the sky, I'm going to start to come down into the green. Maybe even grabbing a little more Hooker's green, especially if you're down below has started to dry quite a bit. And let's do some little taps. And I want this to be really loose and dappled looking. So think of this as, you know, sunflower leaves off really far away. Little bits of sunflower too. Just keep it soft. Just grabbing trace amounts of color to mix them on up in here. I'm just using some Hooker's green, or if I can pick up bits from down here without lifting the color, meaning if it's not so dry that I'm lifting it, I can grab from down here too. Will depend on how humid it is where you live. We are experiencing a bit of a humid storm right now, so it's still a little bit wet down here for me. But yours may have dried long ago if it's drier where you are, and if that's the case, just grab some more paint and pull it up for as long as you have to mix it. And I get a lot of questions about how to stop paint drying out on your canvas. And there are ways that we talk about in class a lot, like using a wet palette, spritzing your paints and adding retarding agents right to the paint. But honestly, I don't love buying a lot of extra mediums to paint with. And when I'm painting in a hot, dry climate, the best thing I ever learned how to do was just to paint faster and work in layers. So, and if your paints are feeling dry, you can go into that sunflower color and you can start just pulling on top a little bit. I'm going to move a little bit of this sunflower color down towards my green so I don't contaminate that pile, and I can work it into the greens a little more. This whole layer should be dark, and I love pulling a few dollops of this sunflower color right over top of the greens just to break it up a little bit. I might even try to pull a few little vertical streaks in here. Let it get nice and dark towards the bottom. And this is it for the underpainting in our background layer. We will be tweaking this up as we go. It's time to let this layer dry. Once it's dry, we're going to sketch on a grid, and I'm going to show you how to draw this figure. So if you're ready to keep on keeping on with me, let's go ahead and grab our blow dryer and give this a little blast. Once your background is nice and dry, we're going to divide this into 9 sections. So go ahead and grab a ruler for me. And I also want you to grab a light chalk or watercolor pencil and a dark one as well. We're going to sketch on our grid next. We're going to divide this into 9 sections using 4 lines. So coming across the 11-inch side, each section is roughly 3.6 to 3.7 inches long. So I'm going to come to 3.5 inches plus 2 millimeters. And I'm going to do that all the way along. And make sure your last segment is roughly the size you want it. So down here, I'm going to use the white chalk. And up here, I'm going to use my dark pencil. 3. And then we're going to draw vertical lines. Now at home, you could probably get away with using the white chalk the whole length, but it doesn't show up for me for a class. So I'm going to use the 2 pencils. Use whatever works for you. And if you have a really dark blue sky, the white pencil will definitely show up. Now coming down the long way, the 14-inch side is roughly 4.6 inches. 4.6, 4.7. Always double check that my measurements are close to that 4.5 to 4.7 inches. Now, once we've got a grid on here, we're going to sketch her on. And let me place my thirds on here. That hat sitting perfectly in the upper third. So go ahead and pull that grid on for me. And the first thing I want you to do is start looking at the grid on the girl here. What things fit nicely in these thirds? When I'm looking at her, the first thing I notice is the hat. The hat, if we look at this whole length here, sits about halfway, like the kind of hat that sits on our head is halfway down this upper section, and it really fills in from side to side, which is really great. That will very much simplify using that section of the grid. Her torso also fits quite perfectly in here. Her torso and her arm, which just kind of peek out a little bit. When I look to locate where her waistline might be, it's really towards the bottom. In fact, if I were to cut this square in half and then in half again, that waistline's pretty much a quarter of the way down here. So again, this waistline is one that we can easily add without having to do too much thinking about it. We see that the dress really fills in this third here, and where the wind has really caught the dress, it's blowing up on an angle into this third here. So let's start with something where we know where it is. Her waistline sits about right here, and it almost fills the entire section. It's about a quarter of the way down, so I'm just going to give it a little kind of gentle Mona Lisa's smile shape for her waistline. And now we can't see her shoulders because they're covered up by her hair. But what we can do is kind of draw an imaginary head here and a little neck. So I know her shoulders are really going to be sitting above her waist, and they're going to be, about here. So let's go ahead and draw this little torso shape. And looking at the sides here, we can see her torso might kind of fill in a shape a little something like this. It's a little bit closer to the right hand side than to the left. It's a little bit closer over here. And pinch her waist in a little bit. Let's give her a little waist in her figure. Okay, so there we go. We've got, just do a straight line to represent the shoulders, okay? What else do we know for sure? We know that if we come halfway up this square here, so kind of put a little line at about halfway, that's where the top of this hat sits. And of course, my little dowels don't come all the way to the top here. But if the dowel did, and if I were to cut this in half, the top of this little shape here sits about halfway, and it comes pretty close to each side. We've just got a little room for the brim of the hat. So the top of her hat is going to be a circular shape, like right here. And we can even darken a little bit at the bottom with whatever pencil we're using to represent the ribbon that's tied around the sun hat. And I have this sun hat, by the way, blue ribbon, and it's a straw hat with holes in it. Okay. And don't let this sketching part freak you out. This is just going to be practice with the grid. Just dive right in there. The worst thing that can happen is some of your lines are wonky. And honestly, if you're not making wonky lines in a bunch of bad paintings, then you're not learning to paint. So just do your best, use the grid, and keep training your eye in this manner. So let's pull on the line of the sun hat. The sun hat comes right down to this third line, and in fact, it does actually dip a little bit below it. The sun hat's a bit smaller on the top, like this, and it gets quite big at the bottom. That's because her hat is, or her head is kind of tilted back. So let's fill our sun hat in a little something like this. And I want you, instead of a round line, use a little bit of what we call planes. So do kind of a straight line and then come out and then down and angle it in a little bit. If we draw these planes, it's a little bit easier to conceptualize how things bend, and then we can kind of round them out as we paint them in, like as we fill them in. Okay, and if we had X-ray vision, her head would be here, her neck would be here, and we'd be coming into her shoulders down like this. Now I want to pull on the rest of the dress for a second here. So if we look where the waist is, we can see how the dress starts to widen out towards the edges of this center third a little bit. And it really kind of, we'll say it kind of swoops down and then out a little bit. And let's just do a little whoop to pull it in at the bottom. Now on this side, it comes down, but it really starts to kind of come up. And you can just do a bunch of light lines. You don't have to go with a dark one all the way. Okay. So a little something like this. And the dress will be coming down on an angle towards this third. Like it hits the bottom again down here. But we want to give it some little kind of ruffles. So I have one that starts right at this third line. One. This ruffle's actually right in the middle of this section. So sometimes I'll start with that one. Like right, if I were to come in the middle down here, be like, here's a big bend in the fabric. And then another one that comes down here. Okay. And then I'm going to just close it up a little something like this. And now we're going to fill in the rest of her arms and her upper body before we kind of think about where the drapery and the fabric is going to be really floating and folding along. So if you were to, I'm sitting, sit tall and kind of pull your elbows into your waist. Your elbows should kind of sit about where your hip bones start, maybe a little lower, kind of around where your natural waist is. If you were to kind of lift your arms in front, like you're holding a bouquet in front of you, they should sit around your kind of natural waistline here. So let's go ahead and sketch this arm. I want you to come pretty well straight down by the body. And we're going to have her shoulder starting kind of right where the sun hat is. And just draw a little, like a long rectangle shape coming right down to about her natural waist. Okay. So our hat's coming down here. Okay, this is kind of, you know, shoulder blades. Her actual armpits would be, you know, here. So here's her arm. And then I want you to widen it up and out just ever so slightly like this. So round it up and out. And then I want you to just curve it back in towards her body and do a little C shape like this. That's where her hand will be grasping the sunflowers. The sunflower sits, the first sunflower sits right kind of where these 2 points are. The whole sunflower sits about right here, covering her shoulder a little bit. I might go a little bit higher up so I can see a little bit more of the stem. And this little C shape is her hand grasping the base of the sunflowers. So I have one big old sunflower, you know, right here. And the center would be kind of in the middle like this. And then we have another sunflower in behind it like this. It's kind of like a C shape starting at her hat, and it's like a half circle. Or you could kind of draw it like a whole circle lightly and then sketch in the half. So the center of this sunflower would be like here, like this. Now we're almost done. Now the other arm is going to be the same length as this one. It's going to come about halfway out into this third over here. And this arm, I want you to kind of start, remember we talked about here's kind of where her armpits would be. We're going to start the arm here, and we're pretty much going to come like straight out like this. And then I want you to just taper it down on a bit of an angle about halfway into this third. For her to kind of come down here, divided in half. You see that's where her elbow starts. The next thing I want you to observe is her arm coming in towards the hat. It really starts to kind of bend just above this little junction point right here. So we're gonna come in towards the hat like this. So just kind of think of rounding up at that elbow. Taper ever so slightly towards the hat and bring the lower line. So this angle here, that's kind of like her sleeve kind of pushed up. Okay. So you can think of it as just one shape and then add this little angled line later. Bending up towards the hat. Then we're going to follow the line of the hat like this and bend her hand in towards the hat. Up and over. It's just up and around that hat. Okay. And once we have all of those lines drawn in, I want to go ahead and connect a few of these ruffles up in towards the skirt. And I'm going to move these thirds now. They've done their job. And I want you to think the light coming down where the ruffle bends up, that's kind of the top of the fold in the fabric. So the light's going to be hitting there. This big ruffle that we talked about actually starts in the middle of her body. And I'm going to connect the line kind of to the top of the ruffle here. Like it's just kind of flowing over like this. So the highlight's going to kind of fill this whole section right here, kind of over this big ruffle. And same thing with this one here. It's going to start pretty close and it's going to sweep over and it's going to be really light where we've got the bend upwards in the fabric like this. And I don't have to draw in every highlight, but I want to get a general sense of the movement of the skirt right now. Okay, so the skirt right from over here, it's really bending over like this, where it's kind of caught, a draft has caught it. And then over here, it's starting to, not totally, but instead of a big angle, it's going to flatten out a little bit like this. So let's almost do a triangle like this so we can get it to kind of flatten out a little bit as we come to the place where the breeze isn't blowing quite so much. This little ruffle here kind of also represents the part that's caught in light. Okay, so we might have a really bright ruffle here. Now this part of the dress is actually in shadow and is wrapping more around the front of her body. So in this little segment of the dress, you'll notice we have a little fold in the fabric that's disappearing, 1, 2, 3, kind of in behind. So that's, I'm just going to capture the direction. So it's going to kind of come down and then behind this ruffle here, a little something like this. And now when we paint her in, she has a cinched waist. So we're also going to have some little bits of fabric kind of pinching up like this where her waistline is. Just giving myself a few marks to indicate direction and light source and the overall shape of this figure. I want to draw one more line, and I want to use a line that's going to reduce her hair into a basic shape before we start adding the flowy tendrils. So what I look for, especially for long hair where all the ends are all over the place, is what is the angle of the kind of basic shape? What's the biggest shape I can see? And it's this angle here. So if I had the hair kind of longer down here and coming up, it might look a little unnatural. So having this angle is really important. And the darkest bit, so where there's no tendrils, is actually up in here. It's almost like a big, massive shape like this. And then we have a few, break it up with a few marks of our brush, some little squiggly wigglies. But generally, I'll put this here. The hair starts and really right under the hat, and it swoops down right from the sunflowers, right, like almost dividing her back in half. And then it's going to kind of come up on an angle like this, and it starts right from about here and comes down. And this is the basic shape of the hair. And yes, it's going to be kind of flowing out and over in all directions, but this whole part here, this shape will very much be filled in. Okay. So now that we have a few lines, let's start painting. Grab your 1/4 inch flat brush and spritz your paints if they're looking a little thirsty. They're looking a little dehydrated. Get the light misting. And we're going to come into some of our sunflower color. This kind of purpley yellow mixture, which we'll be using quite a bit in our paintings. And I want to start with some of the darker purpley yellow mixture. The one that has a bit more purple in it. And I want to block in some sunflowers. I'm going to put one kind of close to her body that really sits right on this 3rd line here. So I'm going to just take my brush and you can even just start with a little circle. Actually, I'm going to make it a little bit further away from her. I'm going to start maybe just like a little circle like this. I'm going to have one here. I'm going to have one here. And I'm going to have one up here. And when I know they kind of all fit in this nice kind of little triangle shape, I'm going to use that same dark purpley color. And I'm going to start to pull out, or dark yellow with purple color. I'm not defining each petal, I'm just pulling out. And up here too. And this little guy. And you can use thick paint, it's going to look really good. And you can have a few little dollops of this color. And let's come up to the sunflowers in her arms. Just kind of pulling around the center. And this little one. Just blocking them in here. And we'll do some on the other side as well. I'm going to have a little one kind of right under her hair, right snuggled up next to her body, and a bigger one just a little bit below. So let's do this little one up on top here, closer to the side edge. And let's do another one right here. Once you've plotted on the petals, the overall circle shape, in this very loose and painterly manner, go into a little bit of plain burnt umber brown, and let's go ahead and fill in the centers. Again, I'm using I like using nice thick dollops of paint. If I make this an oval, it kind of makes it look like it's turned a bit more to the side. So if I do an oval like this, it kind of looks like the sunflower's turning this way. And if I do a perfect circle in the center, it looks like it's looking right out at us. So you can kind of play with that a little bit. When you've got these sunflowers blocked in, just kind of placing them in the composition, we are going to move on to painting in this woman's dress. This fabric is going to be kind of the area we're going to work up the most in layers. So I want us to get in there now. And we'll be using some blues for some of the shadows, but this is very kind of Renoir-esque, where we have incorporated colors from all over the painting. There's some of the purpley sunflower color in there. There's some of the golden yellow color there. There's some blue, and it's all layered over top of each other. You can see the little streak of that purpley yellow in there. So we're going to get a lot of these colors in there, focusing on the cooler colors in the area where it's blocked from the light. We're going to use many of the blues that we have already mixed for the shadows. You know, our ultramarine blue and white, even some of our phthalo blue and white. And I want to squeeze a little white up around our warm sunflower colors as well, so that we can make some light, warm colors. So I have two little blobs of white, actually three. One for some pure whites. And I want you to grab your fixed bright brush and give it a rinse. We're going to mix a little bit of our purpley yellow and white, as well as our more yellowy color. So if I take this mixture that has more purple than yellow and add a little white in it, I get this beautiful color. And add a little more purple into some of it as well. So that's this color with some white. And if I add a little more purple to some of this color, it starts to look a bit more like this, which I think is just a lovely color. Let's take some of this color. It's still got purple in it, but it's got more yellow than purple. And let's mix this with a little bit of white. And as you can see, it's just kind of a lighter, more yellowy value. Really lovely in the dress area. That's just this color with some white. Let's use our 6 bright brush. And let's start painting down some of our highlights. I'm going to start, let's actually start with just some plain white. And you know, where we kind of bend up, I'm going to start right at our waistline, and I'm going to start kind of pulling down a little highlight. I'm going to come along the edge of the dress a little bit. So out we come. That's this little fold here. And I'm going to do another little one on top of it. I'm going to start really close to it at the top. And this one's going to really kind of come up and over. And then everything on this side will be the more shadowy area. Okay. Now this little part's kind of bending up, so I'm going to have a bit more of a highlight here too. I'm going to have one here. And then this is where we kind of created that little triangle shape a little bit to show that the dress is definitely going to be bending down a little more right here. For the highlight section on the shadowy side, I'm going to use some really light ultramarine blue, and I'm going to continue with these highlights. There we go. Now let's make some ultramarine blue that's going to be a little bit darker. And I want you to come along the waistline. And you can use the tip of these brushes for skinny areas. So come along the waistline and we'll add a little shadow into the side of her body and under her arm, under the sunflowers. Even under this arm a little bit. And we're going to have hair all over it, but I still want to block it in with some color. So with this darker ultramarine color, and we're going to have some shadows. Swooping in between these highlights. And sometimes I'll just feather these together a little bit so it's looking, I still want to see the distinction, but with a brush that has almost no paint on it, just kind of feather it together. Keeping it looking a little soft in this layer. I want you to come into some of your lighter ultramarine blue and let's pull up into her body. So kind of in the middle of her body, the marks are straight and then they kind of bow out a little bit as her body rounds. So building in this flow, first in these cool colors, take some of your really light ultramarine blue into her arm. And into her upper arm here. And just keep everything nice and soft for now. Now, while we're waiting for this layer to dry, and we're going to come through again and we're going to incorporate some lighter colors and some warmer colors on top of this and blend it all together. I like starting with this for a base. And then let's go ahead and stick with our 1/4" flat brush. Or I guess we were using a bright. Let's move to our 1/4" flat brush. And we're going to come into some of these purple and yellow mixes, starting with the darkest purple one. I want you to come around the bottom of her hat here. And then let's use the second lightest color and pull a little shadow on. This is very similar to our sunflower color, okay? Pull a little shadow on. The sunflowers will get lighter in another layer, but for now, we wanna, so here's kind of the perimeter of the sunflower, or of the hat, like this, okay? We're gonna leave a little gap right here where the light is coming through, and we're gonna use some of this shadow color over here, and we're just going to do kind of little taps as we fill this in and mix it together. Okay, come along the top of the hat a little bit, and now I want you to come into that color where we mixed the lighter color that has more yellow with some white, this color here, and let's start to fill in right here in little taps, and you can kind of blend it out in taps. Like this. So let's come up here right to the edge this time. You can actually even lighten it a little more. Wipe off your brush. Grab some of the darkest color and make it a little wider right here. and then go into the lightest color at the top and tap it down. Kind of just pulling our little taps in the direction of the hat, you know, the top of the hat, you know, can do a little swirl around. Keep this area nice and light, and this area too, right here, nice and light. As you lighten this color, you can add a little more yellow too. I think that looks really nice. Little taps, taps, taps. And once we have the base of the hat, I want you to take a little bit of phthalo blue and mix it with a little bit of burnt umber brown. So it's a really kind of smoky, dark blue. Looks almost black. And with your little brush, your little zero round brush, we're going to come along the bottom of the hat here. And do the little ribbon. So while we're here with this little brush, you know that purpley color that we mixed? We mixed it with a little bit of white. So that's this color here. I'm going to use some of that in my arm. She's backlit, so her arm is very much in shadow. And that hand is just bending in. Just bend it up and over, a little bit fatter in the lower part, a little skinnier in the fingers. And you can come into some burnt umber brown, or even some of your purpley yellow that doesn't have any white in it. Let's get a little shadow on the inside of her hand just to pop it out. And down here too. And let's blend it into the arm while it's still wet. Just hover over top, push very lightly. We'll go back to the color that has a bit of white in it to fill in this hand. So remember, we're pulling out a little bit here. And then kind of curving in just a little bit for the hand. Now, if you add even more white to some of this color we used for the skin, you can add a little highlight at the top of the hand here. And maybe a little on the arm, but you know, she's mostly in shadow there. Rinse off your brushes. Give your paints a little squirt if they're feeling a bit dry. Now I want to make this fabric pop. Let's make sure this layer is nice and dry. Now you can use any of these brushes in the highlights in her dress. The 1/4 inch flat, the mini fan, or the 6 bright. And when I come in here, I'm going to start using a really light yellow and even some of these purpley colors into the shadows, like in the dress in here. So I'm going to take just some plain yellow into some white, and it's going to be really light. So yellow with white, like this, that's pretty light. But for the final highlights, I'm going to go even lighter, where the color's like this, like just kind of buttery and almost imperceptibly yellow. So I'm going to come into some of this light color and maybe even tap my brush off a bit. And I want to work in these two kind of highlights first. So the one over this kind of big ripple here. And if I make it really small there, and when you start with just a little paint and a little water on your brush, we can let some of those underpainting layers really and truly shine through. The light in this painting is coming down this way. So we're getting more of a highlight here, more of a highlight here. The sunflowers are casting a little shadow. We've got shadow on the opposite side of the hat, so the light really hitting mostly right here. Okay, we can take some of this light yellow even into her arm. And when we do, so remember we had that original arm shape, and I just kind of maybe pull down a bit like this. And if I leave it sketchy, it's going to start to look. So I'm pushing really lightly, very kind of fabric-ish. And then this is kind of the tricep, the front of the arm, wrapping around here. Could even get some pure white on here in some spots. So we're going to do the same thing down here. Let's start with these ripples, and keep calling them ripples, these ruffles in the fabric as the drapery is folding. Pinching it in nice and close at the waistline. I try to hold my brush back a little bit, and even in the shadow, because the light's coming down from this direction, it will kind of slowly fade from here into the darkest bits down below. And I can enhance that by taking some pure white at the tops of these shapes, letting it kind of slowly get more shadowy down below. So these sections are very light. And then we have this section coming around. And let's start another one well over here and kind of pulling over. And then we're going to flatten out. But we do want to start this from over here. Pull it down. Don't be afraid to lightly brush over even the shadows a little bit. I love incorporating some of the other colors in here, like some of this warm color that we used in her arm. Get some paint on your brush and then tap your brush off like on a napkin. And even just a little bit, you know, here and there can look really lovely. This is a dark color, so we'll use this in some of the shadows on the light side, not on the dark side there. Just really kind of a wash. So you can even add a bit of water into this and then, you know, tap off on a napkin. And I could kind of break some of these up even into a few sections. If I keep this edge loose and tap, I can even make it look more like there's some lace at the end. Might even get some really bright yellows in here. I can take a little bit of some of the warm color into the highlights, even on this side. And I want to have at least one, maybe kind of three really distinct shadows at the waistline here, coming from the top. I'm going to take some of my ultramarine blue and white mixture, the really light one, and highlight this just a little bit. And I can get a little bit, this is the color we used in her arm, the purple yellow with a bit of white. Just a little. I'm going to pull some of this color up into her back too. We won't have really any pure whites in her back because it's totally in shadow because the light's really very much in front of her. We might get some of the really light ultramarine blue in there. Just mix it with that warm color. Makes a nice neutral shadow color. Maybe a little tiny bit of the light yellow, but we're going to really blend it in. So on this side, just a little. Let's get some of that yellowy white, really light color into the upper arm here. Now I may add some pure whites into this, but for now, I want to go ahead and start blocking in her hair. We're going to do a dark layer before we get into some of the lighter layers. And the first layer is just going to be burnt umber brown. You can use a little flat brush or a big round brush. Okay, so any brushes like these, the little 1/4 inch flats, or like this, your number 6 round. And I do toggle between the two for her hair quite a bit. I'm gonna add a little bit of water to some burnt umber brown, just to help the flow of the paint. And remember, it's quite dark here under the hat, like this. Very dark there. And we're going to kind of be coming out on an angle like this. So you can kind of start flowing down. So this is my little flat brush. And when I do hair and waves, you can actually just take the whole brush like this in these little waves and even cross over the hairs a lot. So these first hairs are going to be coming down her body like this, and maybe even coming out a little bit from the shape. So let's taper it in maybe a couple areas. So let's come out like this and let it get a little kind of wider before it kind of tapers out like this. And down here too. Let's do a little taper here. Maybe a little something like this. And let's make sure we fill this in so it's nice and dark. So kind of have the base coat for her hair. Just pull a few little strands, loosening up at her arm. The same braid that's catching her skirt is catching her hair. Now, if you want to have her hair brown, you can just lighten the brown with some white. I went with kind of a auburny sort of brown. So I'm going to add a little bit of, you guessed it, this purpley yellow, which is a beautiful hair color for auburn hair. So I'm going to make a bit more, some purple and some yellow. And in some of this, I'll even add the tiniest little bit of our magenta in there. It just makes it a little bit more auburny. Add a little water to some of this to help it flow, and then I might take one little tendril and pull it down. Maybe pull it down the back a little bit, like this. And then maybe have some kind of coming across. This is still wet, wet, and wet, so it won't be super visible. I want to just start and then maybe we really have some kind of catching the wind coming over. When I have so many little hairs trailing over her arm. Making sure I'm still kind of a little bit on this angle. I've definitely gotten her hair. She's got some wild hair here. Nice long. It's gotten longer. While the first layer of her hair is drying, let's come into these sunflowers and really make them poppity pop pop. I'm going to start with some plain cadmium yellow medium hue, and I'm just using my 1/4 inch flat brush, and I'm going to start layering over top. It's going to look a little see-through for now, but we want this layer in here so when we blend the lighter color, it will pick this up. And I'm just pulling out all around this flower, just with another coat of the yellow. And I'll do this little guy too. So this is just a plain cadmium yellow in its pure saturated form. It's a really see-through color. So if I hold it up close, this is the plain cadmium yellow. So you can see it's really see-through. And let's do these little guys here. I like to take a little bit of this kind of purpley brown into the centers on one side, or kind of tap throughout just to get a bit of a two-tone color in there. I'm going to do that up here too. On this side, I'm going to do it on the lower side of the centers of the flowers. And into the yellow for these guys here. Let some of those dark colors shine through. And before we get into the final highlights, it's time to pull in some leaves into these sunflowers. First, I want you to go into some of that really dark green, and I'm going to fill in the stems around her hands. A little something like this, just along the side of her arm. I'm going to stick with the dark green, and I'm going to pull some leaves off of here. Like this, a little bigger towards the flowers. 1, 2, 3. Nice to get these in now so that we can layer the highlight petals right over top. We're going to mix some greens, some nice warm greens for pulling in these leaves. First, let's take some of that color we mixed with for the brim of our hat and mix it with a little bit of our green deep permanent. This was a mixture of the phthalo blue and the brown. And let's pull some lines. I'm going to have one coming right up to this sunflower in a really dark color. Maybe using some little taps of this around her sleeves or the sunflowers, just to kind of pop them out a little bit. And we want it really dark down here. And add a bit more of your cadmium red medium to your green too. That makes it really dark. We're going to mix another green yet. Take some of your hooker's green, and I want you to take some of your cadmium yellow medium and a little bit of this more kind of the purpley mixture and mix it into the green, and it should give us more of like an olivey green. So hooker's green is a really grassy green. This will give us more like a fun olivey green color. And we'll use some of this, but I also want you to mix 2 parts of this green with 1 part white. And it's going to get us, I'm actually going to add a bit more yellow to mine. There we go. It's going to get us this really nice nice kind of warm green like this. So that's this color. It's just a bit of white and a bit more yellow, kind of like a pea green. So take that Hooker's green, add a little bit of white and a little bit of yellow. I'm going to show you the plain Hooker's green with white so you can really see the difference. Hooker's green with just white is really like a grassy green like this. It's super saturated. So by adding these kind of yellowy purple color mixtures to it, we make it warmer. And at this time of day, we want some of those nice warm colors. So let's take the dark version of this color, and we put a really dark line kind of up towards this sunflower here. So I just want you to take a little flat brush, or a little, I'm using my 1/4" flat brush. And let's make some little dabs along this line. Maybe a few up into here. And we're going to add 3 more leaves down this side. I love having a big one down here. I come straight across the top, down, and pull it over like this. One, 2, 3, and we can do a few little leaves over here, just little taps. Leave it nice and dark under here. And as you can see, the greens do start to get really dark as they dry. So we can add a bit more white to some of our warm green, and maybe even a little more yellow. As we lighten it, it's nice to get a bit more yellow in there. And especially these leaves more towards the top, I'm gonna maybe add a little highlight on a few of them. These look really bright now, but once we add the whites to the sunflowers, it will be more balanced. Let's take a little bit of these highlight colors into our leaves up here. Let them be darker on the bottom, and we can use some of these highlight colors just on the tops. We'll want these greens to be a little bit more dry before we really highlight the sunflowers to bring the value up to match the leaves. So I know they look a bit mismatched now, but stick with me. And while this layer is drying, let's go ahead and add the beautiful cutouts into the straw hat. Take a brush like a 0 round brush. And I want you to take a little bit of phthalo blue with a bit of brown and add some white to it. So this should be kind of like a deep smoky blue. Actually, no, let's use ultramarine. Let's take some ultramarine and white, a little bit darker because it's in shadow, and let's come into this, give it a little color. Like this. Really subtle. And now come into some plain burnt umber brown. And where the hat is over her hair, it's going to have darker holes for the cutout. You can use some of that dark reddish brown mix up here too. Okay. I'm gonna use some of that color too to beef up the shadow over here a little bit. Moving into a bit more of the yellowy color. There we go. And into the pure dark burnt umber brown, let's have a few of these cutouts where her hair is in a really dark color. And then up here, it's sky in behind. So I want you to go into, this is the phthalo blue mixture with white, the more teal blue. And we'll come in with a few cutouts in the hat where we've got the sky color showing through. Sometimes I'll come around with some of the lighter hat colors and try to tap a highlight in between. You can, of course, wait for it to dry a little bit. I want it to be really light right on top here. I'm just trying to avoid the little holes that I put in. Really light back here too. And some of that kind of medium yellowy color around these holes. This is the shadow side, so it's got to be darker than the highlight side. Okay, we're getting down to the final tweaks and highlights. At this point, I'm going to come in to my hair And I'm going to add a little bit of white to some of the hair color. I'm going to use my six round here, I think, for a bit. And I just want to add a few little highlights. If the color's too much lighter than the mask tone of the hair, it will look a bit unnatural. We want some really catching the breeze. You don't need too many highlights in here. I found that it was really easy to kind of overdo. And you can weave some in and out of each other. I may add even more highlights, but for now I'm going to keep on to different sections. I'm going to come into some really pure white. And I do have a few kind of pure whites into the dress. Even adding a few more gaps into her arm up here, where my hair maybe got a little too aggressive. I'm not afraid to paint things out, like to paint even over the arm a bit if I want to redo the hair. It's just part of the process. It's time to add the bright highlights. Now I've tapped in a bit more blue on my back and my arm, and I'm going to add some more highlights into the hair once it's dry. So we're on the second last step here. I want you to take some yellow, plain yellow, into some white. Not too light, kind of like what I'm tapping in here. And let's pull some highlights into these flowers. Just a little paint on your brush so we don't go too overboard. If it's too light, you can add variety by having just some more plain cadmium yellow medium in there. I like having a few bright ones in there and then tapping off my brush and then just doing some in the plain yellow or even the more purpley yellow. And you can go really thick with this if you like. And when you're ready, let's pull some of these lighter highlights into the flowers over her shoulder. If you want, you can start again with the plain cadmium yellow medium. That gives something for the white highlights to blend into with the light yellow. I love sunflowers, but they're really prickly. I don't know if I could hold them quite like this without gloves. Okay, so a few highlights in there, right over top of the dark yellow with this light yellow. Letting some of the underpainting show through. And if you spend some extra time lightening the ones over her shoulder, it can really draw attention to the woman. But maybe I've gone a little too light here. Now for my last step here, I am going to go ahead and I'm going to add some lighter bits into her hair. So adding a bit more white to that hair color. And then I'm going to be even more strategic. Maybe just a few. Really light ones. Coming across the body. You can also re-add some dark bits into the hair too if you feel like it's gotten too light. So you could trace under a few of these hairs. Now I'm feeling pretty happy with my lady, but I do want to go into a little bit more white up and around some of these clouds. So I'm just going to take my sponge and lightly pull right over top of the last ones. Maybe just a few more. Tap the sponge off so that it doesn't get too crazy. And you don't have to do this if you're happy with your clouds. This is just a tweak that I want to do for mine. I'm not going to cover the whole sky. I'm just going to come into, oops, any areas that I really want to tweak things. It's going to rub this blue off her arm here. The nice thing is when a layer is dry, you can really easily just wipe it off. When you feel like you're finished, I want you to sit back, relax, and roll your shoulders because you just finished painting sunflower season. It just happens to be sunflower season. Now, while I'm painting this, I planted a bunch in my yard, but we had a huge drought this year and only a few of them came up, but you know, we have a solid 6 or 7 and they just look so beautiful. A lot of the other flowers are kind of fading, but those sunflowers are really kind of just coming into their own. And it does make a beautiful, add a bit of beauty to the transition between these seasons. I can never stop tweaking mine. Okay. I'm going to put my brushes down. That is it for today's tutorial. I want you to go ahead and take as much time as you need. And just a gentle reminder that the purpose of this class isn't to follow along at my pace. You know, if I'm taking a class, I certainly can't work as fast as the instructor because they've practiced their lesson and they're the ones that created the lesson. As a learner, you know, we really need to give ourselves space to breathe. I know some people like to watch the tutorials through, especially if it's a project that they're really excited to do. They'll play it in the background even while they're doing dishes, and then they'll paint it later on so they have a general idea of how the steps come together. So there's no surprises when they sit down to paint. Other people will paint along, but really hit the pause button along the way. I see a question from Lynn who asked, I was wondering if you will be painting Niagara Falls. I will, Lynn. That was actually one of the subscribers choice winners. So Niagara Falls is coming. I've got a castle coming for you this winter. I had to deal with some health stuff this past season, so I haven't created our Niagara Falls yet, but it's a coming along with the castle. And this month's subscribers is actually a barn with sunflowers, so I'm really excited about that. I see a question from Judith, who's over on the website, who asks, how do we get rid of the pencil grid lines? Well, if you've used a watercolor pencil like I have, you can just wash them off. If you tweak your sky like I did, you can also just paint over top of them. I can still see mine through, so I recommend giving them, if it's a watercolor pencil, just wipe it with some water. It will lift most of it, and then you can add more paints on top. Or you can erase it if it's a regular pencil, and if it's chalk, you can just wipe it off with some water. Okay. I am so excited to see these paintings that you make. I love figurative painting, and I love this loose style. It really opens itself up for a lot of wiggle room and interpretation. So to finish off, I wanted to recap what we've done today. But first, I really want you to take a moment and really appreciate the creative time you gave yourself today. Every single brushstroke will build your confidence and skills, and painting offers a little pause from everyday life, which for me, that's what it's all about. I stopped scrolling, I stopped thinking about my to-do list, and I just zone into a painting. And for those of us that love to paint, that is, one of the big things that makes it so meaningful. Please be patient with yourself, because art grows through steady practice. Now, in today's lesson, you practice soft blending for backgrounds, built atmosphere with light and texture, and learned to use a grid method to place your figure. You've layered values to create form and depth, and also explored expressive brushwork to really capture the movement in the fabric, the hair, and in today's sunflowers. And what I mean by expressive brushwork is we didn't, paint every petal like we would in an illustration or in a logo. We've really just pulled lights and darks all over the place in the direction that the object is flowing. And that's such a great way to capture form. Don't forget that this class is free for an entire week, so please come back to it anytime and enjoy it this week. If you need more time with this class, you can keep it for lifetime access in what's called tip to own. It's just a few dollars on my website to purchase individual classes. Now, if you are one of our Kick Academy subscribers, don't forget this tutorial is already in your library and you can revisit it anytime. If you're not a Kick Academy subscriber yet, it really is one of the best ways to learn with us. I give you unlimited access to over 600 detailed painting tutorials like this one, but covering a wide range of themes and skill levels like still life, landscape painting. I do tons of these seasonal themes. I have in pastel palette knife classes, black canvas style designs, more illustrative style, animals, and a lot more. So feel free to check out the Kick Academy if you are painting up a storm. When you're finished your painting today, please share your finished painting in our Facebook group. I check every single post and painting that comes in, and it's a beautiful, supportive community where we can celebrate our progress together, and it's a chance to meet others working on the same classes and see what they've done too. We have such a wide range of skills, from absolute beginners to painters that have been painting for a long time or have transitioned mediums. So please check out others' work. And every time you support someone else, it makes our community a very beautiful place to share and be creative every week. Well, that's it for me. Take care, and I will see you in the next tutorial next weekend. We will be working in our second last bridge. We've been painting a bridge in Four Seasons, a beautiful old stone bridge reflected perfectly in some water. So the autumn one is full of vibrant colors. It's possibly my favorite one of the season. And we're going to bring in another of our animal paintings where we focus on a half face of the animal to really work on how to create realistic fur and the and the shapes of the animal. You guys requested a moose, so a moose is coming up next weekend. Stephanie says, I can't wait for next week classes. Me either. Me either. Especially that moose. All right, I don't see any more questions coming in. That's it for me. Take care. And until next time, I hope you keep it colorful. Bye.